Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Thanks so much for tuning in today, everyone. I'm so privileged to welcome my guest, Traci Molloy, who is a Brooklyn-based artist, educator, and activist who has spent over 2 decades using art to help young people process trauma and reclaim their voices. Her large-scale collaborations with adolescents, from 9/11 survivors to youth affected by poverty, violence, and displacement, have been exhibited at the United Nations, the Pentagon, and the CDC, and are held in the collection of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum as well. Traci's teaching centers on using art to raise awareness around trauma, promote social justice, and foster collective healing in schools and communities. Whether she's leading school-wide projects and overseeing curriculum, working through large-scale collective art projects with grief survivors, and speaking nationally on the power of art, Traci guides young individuals and trauma survivors in helping them find their voices through art and communicating really profound thoughts about grief, violence, racism, economic injustice, bullying, hope, and love while doing so. So we're here today to talk about art, grief, education, and how collective creation can be a lifeline for students and maybe even for the educators who guide them as well. So I introduced myself to Traci when attending public evening programming at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum back in March of 2025. And the program that I attended was called Through Their Eyes, Therapeutic Art for Grieving Children. And the program was an exploration of the role of art making and art therapy as a way to process grief and trauma in the wake of 9/11. And Traci attended that discussion as a panelist representing America's Camp as their artist in residence. A second member on the panel was clinical psychologist and World Trade Center Family Center consultant, Dr. Tom DeMaria. And we're going to have a link to Tom's segment in the show as well, as Tom also had a chance to speak with us on the podcast here back in May of 2025. Both connecting as well as joining Traci and Tom on the panel was Amy Gardner, whose father, FDNY firefighter Thomas A. Gardner, was killed on 9/11 when she was only 9 years old. Amy attended America's Camp as a camper and a counselor. I wanted to also mention that attending the panel featuring Traci, Tom, and Amy was absolutely like witnessing a homecoming because I could just see that there was so much love and energy in that room from Traci's former campers, who, when they worked with Traci, she said during the presentation were maybe about 10 years old, around-ish, maybe a little bit older, a little bit younger, which only means that now they are all in their 30s and established adults. And to see them all come back to Traci after decades and just celebrate their growth alongside her and reunite with her was really touching to see as an audience member. So, Traci, I wanted to see if you could start by telling us a little bit more about what America's Camp is and some of the different factors that have shaped your moments in working with surviving children of 9/11.
So America's Camp, it no longer exists. It existed for 10 years. The first year of camp was 2002. So it ran from 2002 to 2011. I first came to camp in 2003. So I was there 2003 through 2007, and then I returned in 2011. And I facilitated 6 collaborations. So it was a camp for children who lost parents on 9/11 or for children whose parents were first responders that were killed in the line of duty. And I believe the first year of camp, there were maybe 70 kids. And then each subsequent year, it got higher and higher, and then it plateaued and it started to decrease in numbers.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is there were just so many children. So at the 10-year mark, the children that were in utero were 10 years old.
Yeah.
And so there were not going to be more children coming in. At the camp's height, there was probably 400 kids and maybe another 150 to 200 staffers. And some of the staff were former campers who had come back to become counselors and counselors in training.
Could you describe the process of creating collective art pieces through America's Camp?
So these projects were very large. You'd have 7 days with the kids and you'd be on campus maybe 8 or 9 days. And I would do workshops. So all during the day, the kids would come and they would make the work. And then at night, I'd have to construct these pieces. We had the opportunity to have the show. And while the show was up, folks from the 9/11 Museum, which did not exist at this point, so the museum wasn't even formed, it was a concept that it was going to happen. They were invited up to see the art. And Jan Ramirez, who was actually on the panel, she was the moderator, was one of the initial individuals that came to see the work, and they wanted it. They wanted everything. And I remember the phone call. I started crying because I was like, oh my God, this is my dream. This work belongs to the America's Camp community, but it belongs to the world. Because I knew at the time when I was making the work with the kids, we were documenting history. I was going to document grief as it shifted, and we were going to have these pieces that could maybe shift the way people think about how to make collaborative art, how to make collective art, and frankly, how to work with kids. Because usually people poo poo any artwork that kids have been involved with.
I love that the work that you've done through America's Camp really gave children a voice. So tell us a little bit more about what it was like to actually work with America's Camp.
I think one of the misconceptions about America's Camp is people think it must have been really sad. Like it must have been a terrible place. And it was the exact opposite. I experienced more joy at America's Camp than anywhere else in my life. I would get goosebumps literally from joy. So to have the opportunity to celebrate the kids, to celebrate the sort of magical place and the art that was facilitated, that was awesome. I've known these kids longer than their deceased parent.
Yeah.
I had the privilege of watching them grow up.
Yeah.
I get to see them as incredible adults. And as a parent, I just know what a big deal that is and how heartbreaking it is that their lost parent didn't get to experience that.
Wow.
And that responsibility is huge. Like, I know I'm not the only one in the America's Camp community that really takes that seriously. I think about that a lot. I think about the first time I heard it actually was at America's Camp, and it was when camp was coming to an end and the directors opened up the floor to ask kids, did they want to share things? And this young boy stood up and he said, I've known you longer than my dad. And to the men in the space, and like, you guys have taught me what it means to be a man. Ugh. And then I started thinking, wow, I've known these kids longer, and that, I mean, it's intense and you don't get to walk away, right? Like a lot of this work, I think one of the things that's really interesting about what I do is in instances I go into communities, or sometimes I'm part of communities for extended periods of time. And you're working with people when they're extraordinarily vulnerable. You're trying to assist and transform the trauma, but you're also trying to allow people to remember that love is still present, love exists, and can they connect with another human being? Can they foster that trust? And in some instances, you're connected to these people for life.
What are some particular moments or memories that you remember from being at America's Camp with those children that has really shaped the work you've been doing for the 2 decades since then?
Man, there's so many memories. I'll share a couple stories related to the Phoenix. The Phoenix is about a 15 by 20 by 8 foot giant paper mache bird sculpture. And the interior is a wooden frame, and the exterior is comprised of these feathers that started out as 12 by 12-inch paintings. It's watercolor crayon on paper. And the paintings were then converted into these feather shapes. And each feather was made by a child who attended America's Camp. So the underbelly of the bird has about just under 400 feathers. And then the backside of the bird has about between 150 and 200 feathers. And so at the time of the Phoenix, Harry Potter was very popular. And we had gone on a tangent around Greek mythology at camp. the year prior, I had made a piece called Apollo's Ascent. And Apollo in Greek mythology is also connected to the phoenix. So one of the things I said to the kids during my little sort of unveiling of the phoenix was we talked about how when Apollo was carrying the sun, and every day around noontime, the sun freezes in the sky, and it's this one thick spot, and then it starts its descent. And in mythology, the story is the phoenix is singing its song, and the song is so beautiful that Apollo stops to listen to the song each day. And then when the phoenix stops singing, the sun moves on its way. And so what I talked to the kids, and I said, I hope someday, when you leave here, you look up and you see the sun, you think about the phoenix singing her song, and you remember the beauty that you've all created. So one of the things that's very important to me is empowering the kids and recognizing may have facilitated and designed all these projects, but the power of this work comes from the art that was made by them. So when the Phoenix was created, I worked with young college students. I want to acknowledge that America's Camp brought in folks literally from around the world, and everyone volunteered their time to do this, myself included, to create this work. And we had this idea that how can we make the phoenix symbolically burst into flames? Because that would be really cool. And so we decided to make it glow in the dark. Well, no one knew that this was going to happen except for those of us working on the project.
That's incredibly powerful symbolism. Thank you for sharing that. So then, what was the children's reaction when they saw the phoenix for the first time? Can you take us back to that moment?
So the last night of camp, we had all the kids there, and they were in this dark space, and we had 3 spotlights on the bird. And we had, as tradition, the year before, we had some folks from New Zealand did the haka, which is a Maori. I don't know if you would say it's a dance or a chant. It becomes sort of transcendent. So just in terms of the arts, you're setting up an experience where it becomes visceral. We're there and we have these 3 spotlights on the piece, and the guys do the haka, and I get up and I tell my little spiel about the piece. And then we cut the lights, and all of a sudden the phoenix is glowing, and we have it on a cable, and we're like slowly raising it up, and the bird starts to swing. It just starts to move, and you just hear the whole audience. I mean, I'm telling the story right now, and I've got goosebumps. And the whole audience, like it just froze. It was just like magic. Magic happened because the bird is glowing, and the parts that are glowing are its eyes and all the feathers. And that's what all the kids made. And it just starts, it's like it's moving, and it's like looking at everyone, and it's raising up. And I'm telling you, it was the most incredible artistic moment of my life.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing this powerful moment with us, Traci. And to our listeners, please check out Traci's provided photographs of the phoenix linked here in our show notes. Okay, so now we have a good sense of what the artistic process was like in spaces for healing, such as America's Camp. Now, on a similar topic, what would you say happens then to children neurologically when they're going through the process of art design and art creation? And what are they holding on to from before versus after they complete a piece of art as you've seen it? And also, what can you share about what you have witnessed around how working in communities is beneficial for trauma survivors?
So I think one of the things, and this is across the board. So this isn't like I've worked in obviously the community with 9/11 kids, folks understand what happened. But I'm also thinking about, I've worked extensively in Appalachian, Ohio, in communities where opioids and addiction have had profound impact on kids, in communities where systemic poverty, systemic racism, right? All these things that are much harder to recognize, but are very palpable, right? To like, you have the big trauma, right? 9/11, you know exactly what it is, versus the little t trauma, which is like the drip, drip, drip of poverty, the drip, drip, drip of racism, the drip, drip,
Mm.
drip of lack of health care, mental health care, physical health care. So, what happens? The most important thing is when you have folks working in community, they start to recognize that they are not alone. They are not isolated with these emotions. They have other people that understand their lived experiences. And I'll use America's Camp as an example. And this is a little grim, but this is true. So the kids would be working and I'm just doing my thing. And my job is, how can I help you make the best image that you want to make? So I don't draw on anyone's drawings. I listen to what you're saying. And then if I can offer artistic guidance, I will. But often you just kind of you give people the framework and then they go and then they want it to be good. So I'm happy to give aesthetic feedback. So the kids, I remember this was like in the earlier years too. They were talking about, do you think your parent fell? Do you think they jumped? Oh, I think my mom or dad had jumped, and here's why. And that is so dark. That is so incredibly difficult to have to bear witness to and not react to. But as they were saying it, they were like, "Oh yeah, that I think this," like they were connecting to each other, or how much, again, I recognize this is really very difficult content. How much of your dad did you bury? That is horrible stuff. But in that shared space, they could talk about this because they couldn't talk about it in their school community. And they couldn't talk about it even in their home, because in their home, the children were instinctually trying to protect their surviving parent. So a lot of it is you become that good child where you don't want to make things difficult on the parent because you can see their grief. So you don't want to talk about the hard stuff or ask the questions. But in this space, you can do that. There were stories that were shared that were extraordinarily difficult to bear witness to, but also man, I'm like constantly humbled and just, I don't even, I'm like going to get emotional. I don't even know how to say it, but people are so vulnerable. And these stories that I've been gifted, they're sacred and I want to do them justice and I want to do their artwork justice. And I just feels like such a sense of responsibility to do the best that I can to make these pieces in honor of the folks that were killed and in honor of the folks that are still here, celebrating the folks that are not here. One of the things I think is very funny about trauma is trauma's going to win, right?
Yeah.
You do not have to invite trauma to the party. Trauma
Hmm.
trauma
It's already
comes,
there. Yeah.
but you do have to invite joy. You do have to
Yes.
invite hope. And so, if I segue for a second, a lot of what I try to do with the collective art projects that I facilitate is to bring in hope, to bring in joy, to give opportunity for resiliency to shine because trauma's there. Trauma's coming. Like they're the unwanted guests and trauma's always present. And trying to deny it, trauma's still coming.
I was also wondering, so with the work you're doing within schools, so you have spent many years working inside our schools as well, especially the Title Ones and the transfer schools, and you've been working with them to design trauma-informed artistic experiences. And what have these collaborations taught you about the emotional worlds that young people are carrying into our classrooms? And what have you learned that students truly need that maybe they either have and can grow more further into, or are lacking from our schools about what they should get back after they return from crisis?
There's a big question too. I think for me, most notably would be post-COVID work.
Mhm.
I worked for 12 years at a school in the Bronx and running art programs. And then most recently, I've been working in Queens, in Elmhurst, Queens, at a transfer school. And Elmhurst was hit really hard by the pandemic. And the kids that I worked with and still work with, some of them are older high school students. So they had to get jobs during the pandemic because maybe they had a family member who was sick, or almost everyone at that school knew someone that died as a result of the pandemic. And they couldn't maybe go to class because they had to babysit because their parent was going to work. And yeah, so I think the most important thing was the community was fractured. So kids' sense of place and sense of connection within place and space was broken. So how do you slowly re-enter. And so we did art. And I have to applaud the principal who said, I don't want to go back to school and pretend nothing happened. I don't want to start school this way. He reached out to me and said, can you help with our faculty first? Can you help them? And then can we do something for the kids? And I said, yes. So that summer, we did workshops with all the faculty and staff, figuring out ways to help them be able to re-enter school, because the year that everything was essentially from home, there were some teachers that were in the building and some teachers due to medical issues that were not, and that could cause resentment. Some educators felt like literally they're risking their life being at school because of mandates. And other people were also risking their life because maybe they had different health complications. So I needed to foster that community. The kids, when they got back, there was so much fear, so much fear. And I think that would be true no matter what the situation was. And again, I can use COVID because I haven't worked in a school post, like you were in Parkland post a mass shooting. So you have an idea of some of that horrendous anxiety, right? There was terrible anxiety. There were people that had lost loved ones. We needed to give space to be able to make art and process. And the kids felt like they were so grateful because it gave them a chance to share, to talk, and to slowly get to know each other because they had forgotten how to be in the same room or all of that stuff is so important. And I will also add, I think one of the things that people forgot was how to play, right? How to have fun, how to be silly together. And very slowly, so now over the arc of the 4 years that I've been working with a school, I've seen extraordinary growth. So I work with all the counselors, I work with all the staff at the school, and I work with all the teachers. These are not art teachers, right? Like you got math teachers and science teachers working on art projects. They all have to do it. And then we do these huge school-wide projects, and they are co-teaching along with me. So like the whole school shuts down and this is what we do. And it's been transformative. Kids come to school in order to do the art projects. I don't know if statistically there's been improvement, and that's something I need to do research on because, again, it's speculative at this point. If there's improvement in graduation rates, if there's improvement in attendance. This school is a school for kids who have failed out of traditional school. They have massive struggles. Many of them, English is not their first language. Many of them have profound learning disabilities, lots of difficult traumas. A lot of them have already lost a parent. Some of them have experienced incarceration. Some of them are parents, have given birth to children. So you're dealing with complications that are really big. And what happens neurologically? What happens inside the brain? One of the things that I try to do with the art projects is we try to set up two things. One, you want to have play and have fun because that cultivates bonding. But the second thing is we want to calm. So in the last few years, I've been asked to co-design the foundations curriculum, which meets after lunch. So we're trying to set up a transition. So when the kids come back from lunch, people are often hyped. And so how do you set up the classroom space so that they enter into this space, and then we're going to have a few minutes to transition, and then we're going to make these art pieces. And what I'm finding is, in particular, projects that work with the hands, for example, using clay or anything that's particularly tactile, really helps to soothe and calm. And because our education system nationally has devalued the arts, you have kids that haven't had experiences with clay or with paint, so they regress. They become like young children touching this for the first time. And they need to do that. They need to regress. And I say to the teachers, let it happen. Let it happen. If the kids need to put the paint on their hands and do this, yes, I know it's ridiculous, but they need to finger paint because they didn't do it before. And they need to connect to that part that didn't get taken care of. And then they'll do their other thing. And then again, just anything that I explained earlier, working with communities that have experienced profound trauma, you give options. Here's the parameter, and it's not cookie cutter. They're all individualistic pieces, so they have to have a reason. They have to be able to explain their ideas, and it's designed so that anyone can do it.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that what schools benefit from the most in the aftermath of crisis is acknowledging the pain while upholding routine in the process, while still welcoming play into the environment. And you've mentioned already just how cross-curricular you've allowed art to become. So I'm curious, especially when giving people space to express their grief, their anger, and their love all at once, especially for these educators that feel like they're pulled in all different directions from curriculum and the state exam, how can we still allow art to become a cross-curricular experience?
Teachers are very overworked. We're asking a lot of them. So my job is, one, it has to make sense because no teacher is going to do this. Like the school is going to, if this isn't working, there's going to be a revolt. And the fact that not only is it working, but you have people, again, this is not their area of expertise. This is not their strong suit, and they're asking for it. They're like, oh, can Traci come in and do this
Mm.
project? So that to me is affirmation, and the administration feels the same way. Like something's happening here, something is working. We believe in this. And it's also creating this really great sense of community spirit. So the school gets excited. The artwork then goes up, transforming the culture. People are seeing their stuff on the walls. It's just so much happier. It's like such a healthier place. If nationally people understood how to use arts integration as a learning tool, schools would be so much better because people process in different ways. Not everyone is an auditory processor. Some people are visual processors. So if you ask someone to write an academic response, okay, they may not be good like that. But if you ask them to draw and then act it out and then write a little sentence around it, it's going to sink in a deeper way. I just wanted to clarify
Yeah,
too, because I think this is important. I'm not a therapist. I have a lot of experience working with trauma survivors and have done extensive research and feel I have a certain skill level, but my background is not art therapy. I'm
right.
a visual artist.
Yes.
And so it's very important to me on all these projects that I work with mental health experts.
And I'm glad you clarified that, Traci, because I know many of our listeners here would be able to testify at some point from their careers the ease in being able to fall victim to the superhero narrative and working alongside students of trauma.
Savior syndrome, I think
Exactly. Yes.
a lot of well-intentioned teachers fall into that trap. I've aged as an educator. I know that kids want to connect, all right? They
Yeah.
crave that space, but then how you connect and what spaces you're providing. So even if the
Mhm.
framework is this one thing, stuff sneaks in. And then you're like, oh no, now what am I going to do with this
Yeah,
information? But
exactly.
that's also why you have other professionals, colleagues you work with.
Exactly.
You're going to be more likely to want to be in a classroom space if you start to feel positive energy in that space. So you don't go to someone like, we're going to make a piece of art about this thing. Here's an option. You can maybe consider this thing. So a lot of what I do is if I'm working in a situation where someone's experienced really life altering stuff, say, for example, with the 9/11 community, they
Mhm.
could make a piece of art about their lost parent. They could make a piece of art about how they're feeling. Or they could make a piece of art celebrating America's camp. Or they could make a piece of art celebrating something that they had accomplished. You want to give people autonomy. You want them to have control
Yes.
because they didn't have control during a very horrific part of their life.
I've noticed that we want to feel better, but a lot of us feel vulnerable leaning into the discomfort to make that happen. How can schools, especially ones that may not have the resources, still try to protect and prioritize the arts as a learning game?
Okay, I'm going to answer that question in a second, but I need to say something first.
Yeah.
This country understands the importance of the arts. You go to any private school, there are multiple classes for arts education. Private schools have You have theater educators, you have multiple arts educators, you'll have maybe dance, right? Certainly music, certainly musical instruments. And yet you go to public schools and people are always scraping to get that. So this is not a situation where folks don't understand the value of it. Folks in positions of power penalize poor people, right? Systematically, poor people are treated as less than, and that tends to impact Black and Brown communities higher than other communities. I'm sorry, I had to get on my little pulpit and say that because I think when we talk about the disparity in arts education, we have to recognize this is a class issue. And this isn't an ignorance issue because people do know, people do understand. They may not think it's as important. And in the sense that they may say okay, I take that back, they do think it's important because they have never said no, we don't need the arts. And every culture, when we look at culture, we look at the arts, like this is how we remember things. And if you ask people what they remember from their school experience, that besides sports, it's something that happened through the arts. Maybe you were in a
And your
marching band,
theater.
you were in the school's marching band, maybe you were in a school play, maybe you helped design the yearbook and you took photos. All of these things are connected to the arts. And that's what people hold on to. That's what
Mm.
people crave. I think one of the big hiccups is standardized testing because what's happened is folks start to learn for a test and study for a test instead of learning for learning's sake.
Mhm.
And we need, with especially early on and with young children, you're trying to cultivate creativity and curiosity. When the trauma is so severe that a child can no longer figure out a fantasy or a narrative where they can't be creative, that is deeply troubling. And so if we don't give children the tools, the ability to let's go play, let's go create, not saying we have to teach them how to play, you just have to give them the opportunity. And I think that what happens with adults, with educators in the classroom, is their play has also been stunted. Because if they're a product of the American school system, chances are that they stop making art around middle school age. And chances are somebody said to them, "You're not very good at this." So they started to believe they weren't. And so what I find often happens when I'm doing workshops with educators, because this is also how we change the system, is you have to have educators on board with this is important, right? And not just important because it checks a box, but understanding on a real core to your human being level, we need this stuff. And so a lot of what I do when I'm doing professional development with teachers is trying to undo the negative learning and the negative self doubts or the criticism that they have in their heads. I'm not good at this. I can't do this. And so you're celebrating that. And then they start to be like, oh, this isn't so bad. I've enjoyed it. Because if you think, again, if we go to the pandemic, during the pandemic, all of a sudden there's this huge resurgence of coloring books for adults. Everybody wants to color, right? Because it makes people feel good. It calms the system. You have folks listening to music to calm our bodies, right? We're watching TV shows because that's what is there, but it becomes a way to understand theater or understand the human experience, right? So we need the arts. The arts makes us better people and makes us understand society. In countries where people in position of power try to suppress free speech and try to suppress the arts, books are scary, right? We must censor them. Art is scary. We must censor that. We must have control of the information that's being disseminated because when we give people the ability to create and think, you might have to deal with some of the complicated emotions that come up as a result. And if people aren't equipped to deal with that, if they're not trauma informed, if they can't be in space when someone that has a hard emotion that maybe manifests as tears or manifests as anger or manifests as complete shutdown, because we're talking about these two things. But the other thing that happens is kids dissociate, they go away, they go somewhere else in their head when trauma has happened. And what do teachers do? Like, kids just quiet. I don't have to deal with them. I can just ignore them. But that's a trauma response as well. So how do you get that kid to interact?
I'm wondering, like, when we have, I'll even say that stigma towards art classes in schools, like if you look at a student's schedule, it's like, oh, you're taking chemistry, AP physics, right? And then they have an art class. How can we overcome as a society what that stigma looks like and add so much more value? Like, first of all, why do we have that stigma? And then how can we take it away to really add the value that it deserves?
I think that as a society, we tend to value money and product, final product, more so than process. So the idea that you have to study or you have to have a focus in these areas that are going to be more lucrative, or this can come from family, parental pressure, societal pressure. There's nothing, if you grow up poor, yes, of course you want stability. If you've never had stability, then that's something you crave, and there's nothing wrong with craving that. But the way our school system is designed, it is very final product oriented. In the arts, there's a product, and that's important, but there's a process too. And sometimes the process of making is more important than the product that is made, because it
Every
is,
time.
yeah, I will say this. One of the coolest things for me, when I worked in the Bronx, I taught a lot of young educators. So most of the time, on average, I would work with six, sometimes seven artists or seven educators, sometimes eight per year. And then, so I was there 12 years. So there's turnover. So I figured out at one point I had worked with 27 different educators. Some of them went on to become administrators. Many of them left the Bronx and went on to different states. And through social media, you keep in touch with people. I have since found out they would write back and say, hey, remember that project we did? I'd like to do that now here. So, work we started in the Bronx, went to Philadelphia. Work we started in the Bronx, went to New Haven, Connecticut, right? Work that started in the Bronx went to New Jersey. That is exciting. That's exciting because if educators, again, these are not art teachers, these were all humanities teachers, English and social studies. They believed, they understood the power of arts integration. They saw it working. They're like, hey, Traci, we're going to do this elsewhere. And when they became administrators and they're like, we're teaching our teachers how to do this, I was like, yes, 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 amazing, victory, victory. So ripple down. Got to keep doing it.
Exactly, the ripple effect. That's it.
Yeah.
And I love one line that you have from your artistic statement that says, if you are complacent, you are complicit. So I wanted you to tell us a little bit about that philosophy, and if you could tell us what you find to be Traci's secret sauce to a better system in education, what should our listeners walk away with?
Okay, so first I'm going to talk about if you're complacent, you're complicit. That would be one of my mantras, and the other mantra would be lead with love and err on the side of kindness. So those are my sort of two ways to think about what you do in the classroom. But if you're complacent, you're complicit. I'm going to share a personal story that's a little more personal than I normally talk about in public lectures, but I have in the past. When I was in my early 20s, I was in Atlanta volunteering at a Boys and Girls Club, coaching soccer there. And one of my kids was killed by gun violence. And he was an eighth grader. And this was particularly difficult. And in many ways, the lessons learned from this experience have had a profound impact on my work today. So his name was Gino Thomas, and I want his name acknowledged because he was a great, great kid. And he was at his eighth grade dance, and another boy, a 16-year-old boy, shot him, thinking he was somebody else. So it was a case of mistaken identity. Now, this was 1999, and this happened 2 weeks after Columbine, which was also in 1999. That was in April, and Gino's death was in early May. So there was a lot of attention to his death that may not have otherwise occurred. And Dr. King's son spoke at the funeral. The mayor at the time spoke at the funeral. Dr. King's son said very directly, my father and grandfather died by gun violence. I understand what it's like to lose a family member this way. The thing that stayed with me was the mayor at the time said, we're going to make changes. We're going to do this stuff, right? We're going to make a difference. And I very naively believed that changes were going to come and that things were going to happen. And I got excited. And I remember being back at the Boys and Girls Club and talking to the director, this extraordinary woman named Gail Johnson, who is still working and doing the work, and just an extraordinary woman, an incredible human being. And I said to Gail, I was like, where are they? They said, they're coming. They're going to come and help. And she said to me, look around. We are here. We are the people that are doing the work. We're the ones that are going to make the changes. That echoes the, if you're complacent, you're complicit. If you want to make a difference, you must be the one to take the action to make the difference. Don't wait. Superman's not coming. And so that moment with Gail has just really left a mark on me. And there was another moment also in Atlanta, very parallel, with an artist named Mildred Thompson, who is now deceased. And Mildred said to me, very similar, if you want to make change, you do it. You make the change. If you see kids that don't have access to the arts, you figure out a way to get them access to the arts. You can operate outside the system too. So if the system's not working, don't use the system. Or if the system works in this way, figure out how to use it to make it work. And these two conversations have really helped influence a lot of my drive and figuring out, if I get in the door, I've got like my underlying agenda, right? I've got to make art accessible. I've got to get people to understand that art isn't something that's scary, right? And we have to use trauma-informed pedagogy so that people can process some of their difficult emotions. And then we've got to bring joy. So let's have fun. So when we're doing this stuff, let's laugh, let's play. And so that would be the secret sauce. I just feel like the other secret sauce is you are who you are. Kids have the highest BS meters of anybody. And if you go in and you try to be somebody else, they're going to see through that. And I'm like, I want to lead with love. I want them to know that I love them. I want them to feel that love. I want that space when I'm in the space to cultivate that energy. And it's contagious. So if you go in, you're like, oh, I hate being here. This sucks. They're going to pick up on that. So you got it. I'm also extraordinarily lucky because my jobs they're not every single day. So that is so hard. Educators have the hardest job every day to have to like go in and deal with the stuff. And then they keep getting stuff piled on them. So my other job is like, how do I champion educators and support them and give them help and hope and just bring the love.
Outstanding. Thank you for these charismatic thoughts, Traci. And what's coming up next? What are some projects that our listeners can learn about in terms of what's happening now?
So in October of 2025, the project that I'm working on with folks impacted by the mass shooting in Lewiston will be going public. Actually, technically, the public opening will be November 7th, but there'll be a private opening in October for people impacted most closely. And that will be at LA Arts in Lewiston, Maine. That piece will be on display through mid-January, and then it will travel to various venues, most likely just in Maine. The show Drawing Meaning is still up at the 9/11 Museum, and that will remain up. And you can see portions of Pandora's Lantern, which was a piece I facilitated in 2007 with the America's Camp community, and then photo reproductions of the Phoenix. Great news, amazing news, and I can share this publicly now. And for the 25-year anniversary exhibit at the 9/11 Museum, they are going to show the actual Phoenix. So yeah, I know. I mean, I can't because it makes me like cry, but it was always my dream. Someday this piece would be in that space and that my kids would come back and they would have their own children. Oh my God, we'd totally lose it. Yeah, and they'd be able to like share that piece with their kids. So it's happening. That's really cool. So yeah, so I'm working with the museum on that. And then in Bennington, Vermont, I have a public art piece right now called I Am, I Will, I'm Afraid, Bennington. And all you have to do is drive through Bennington. It's 8x11 wall piece, 8x11 foot wall piece hanging in downtown Bennington. And that will be up until December. There'll be some public programming around adolescent mental health concerns in the fall in Vermont. So that's where people can see some work. And that's what I got for you. That's my hype.
Thank you again to Traci, who has been here to remind us that art is not just decoration, it's documentation, it's liberation, and sometimes even a lifeline. That doesn't make art a bonus, it makes it an essential. And in Traci's own words, teaching is not about creating good artists, but it's about creating responsible, inquisitive thinkers and art practitioners. All of us as educators have had the choice in allowing students to express their complex emotions using visual truths, which can be laden with grief, anger, and even love. So you can learn more about Traci's work through her website listed in the show notes, and follow her on Instagram at Traci Molloy, which will be linked in our show notes as well. So if this episode has resonated with you, please share it with a colleague, a student, or a fellow creative, and somebody who might need to hear that healing continues to be possible, even when our words fail us. Until next time, keep the dialogue open and our space brave. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.